Welcome to Finding Faith, the space we come to share stories of encounter, ask questions, and share in the lived experience of others. As you listen to the stories of our interview guests, I ask that you consider the courage it takes to stand before your peers and share your experience of faith for the benefit of another. My name is Jessie Bennett, and this is the 25th episode of Finding Faith. So today we have with us Jesse Horn. Jesse, why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself?
Well, first, thank you for asking me to join you on this. I've actually listened to quite a few episodes, and so I'm thankful that you put this podcast out. There's a million podcasts out there, and it was nice to find one local here that had such compelling stories. So I live just outside of Whitesville. I actually live in Owensboro now, but I grew up and farmed right outside Whitesville with my family. And, you know, this is home for me. I grew up in the United Methodist Church, and I was very, very active there. I was involved in youth group, and, you know, even as a young man was involved in the business of the church and that kind of thing. And was really blessed to have a family that was, still do have a family that's very Christ-centered and really puts a lot of focus on faith and family. And so, you know, the church was a big part of my life. And now I have since joined the Catholic Church and, of course, attend here at St. Mary's and have really seen a maturity in my faith and continued to develop that as I've grown older. And I'm still a young man, 37, but as I think back on my relationship with Christ and how it's developed, becoming Catholic and being a member of this parish has really helped that flourish. So.
Very good. And Jesse's going to share with us some experiences in his life and how God has worked in him and through him.
I'm going to kind of break things down here into life events and how God impacted me. And when I was fairly young, I had a traumatic thing happened just beginning my teenage years. My mother actually exited our family, and she came from a broken home, and it was really bad. Broken doesn't really describe it, but she survived her childhood, just lots of abuse, drugs, neglect, and she emerged from that and started a family with my father, and for quite some time lived a good life, but those demons were always there for her, and at some point she sort of slipped back into that old life of hers. And one day she was gone, and you know there's a whole lot to tell there, but we'll keep it short. She was not and has not been a part of my life for a long time, and that was very difficult. But thankfully, my father and my extended family they prayed, they worked, and they really wrapped their arms around my sister and I, and we got through it. And, you know, I really, looking back, it's hard as a young person to sometimes see the larger things that are happening around you. And I really feel like God just answered the prayers of my family. My dad, he's not a perfect man, but he really took a tough situation and became a tremendous father. God really guided him and helped him quell his anger and gave him the patience to see the court process through. And you know, I really feel like God protected me. You know, for a while we were in a pretty rough situation, you know, not just physically, but emotionally. Even now, I sometimes think, man, how did I get through that? And I'm sure that it affected me. I know it has. But, you know, sometimes you see people go through a tough situation and they just can't seem to get on the other side of it. And I didn't experience that. I really feel like God gave me the strength to move forward. He gave me the courage to forgive my mother and understand that, you know, really the greatest thing she ever did for me was to step away. You know, she had some things that she's going through still today that would not have been conducive to a good family life. And And I truly believe that that may be the greatest thing she's ever done for me. I thank God for the gift of that wisdom. As I grew up a little bit and got through high school, I did go to college. I was grateful to have the opportunity to attend college and really enjoyed those years of my life. But I drifted from my faith. I was no longer in a small community going to church with my family every weekend, and it's easy to get wrapped up in life and not put your relationship with God first. And I certainly was one of those young men. I drifted from my faith. I never stopped believing in God or grace, but I really just did not actively live a Christian life. I pursued my career and personal interests, and all the while I had this nagging feeling that I was a bit lost. I had met my now wife, Carolyn, but I wasn't certain what I should be doing or where I should be doing it. I had a lot of ideas, and several of them really excited me, but I still felt lost. I had left the farm, thought I would see what else the world had to offer, and had the opportunity to travel and work internationally, and thought that might be a route I wanted to go, but just really didn't feel like I had found my true calling. I was in graduate school and I started working for a nonprofit organization, and in June of 2008 I lost my job. The economy fell apart, and nonprofits rely on donations, and I was the only non-essential employee there, so it was no surprise that I was the first to go. And it wasn't really a job I belonged in, and I knew it. I had been looking, but it was still a really deflating experience, and I took it really personal. And so I decided I'd buckle down and finish my coursework on my master's degree and write my thesis and just get that behind me and move on to the next chapter of my life. I had considered going to law school and that kind of thing, and was still figuring things out, and my dad called me. And since I had left the farm, we talked some, but not a lot. And so when he called, I answered. He had a young man helping him, and we're rapidly approaching harvest. I think it was July, late July maybe, and this guy decided that he wanted to go to college and pursue a professional career, and that left my dad without any help getting the crop in. And so, I laid my plans out. I knew what I wanted to do, and here's my dad calling me, asking me to drop everything and come help him, and I reluctantly told him I would. I'd appreciate it if he tried to find somebody else, but that I would come help him if he were unable to. And he, that's the way that story goes. He didn't find anybody. I came home, did not even know I missed farming, completely fell back in love with it, really got back into seeing my family every day and having that strong, supportive relationship. And after harvest, I went back to Lexington, packed my things, and moved home. I really feel like there's so many choices that we make every day. Some of them are insignificant, some of them are larger decisions, but God can steer us a direction. At the end of the day, we have to make the decision. But it was a tough call for me. Like I said, I didn't even know I had missed farming, but I really feel like God knew that I needed to get back home, and that door was opened, and it was a tremendous fall. I completely got re-immersed in farming, and it became the thing I thought about every day, and I knew without a doubt this is where I was supposed to be. And that is such an overwhelming feeling when you know. Carolyn, my wife, we weren't married yet, but this was not for her. She almost left me. We had big plans, and here I was totally changing everything. And God just, I know that He put me here for a reason. I still don't fully know what that is. But this is where I was supposed to be, and I knew it, and I couldn't ignore that fact. I do believe that God has a plan for us, and it's often difficult to see. We don't understand the things that happen in our lives sometimes. But God steered me here, and I began to really feel Him in my life again. Began to pray again a lot. On the farm, there's often a tremendous amount of time that is just spent bouncing across the field in a tractor, and there's only so much of the radio you can listen to, and you get a lot of time to think about things. And sometimes that's a good thing, and sometimes it consumes you. But I began to pray a lot and search for direction, and I really feel like that's why God brought me home. You know, I had no intention of ever being back here again, really, and here I was. And I have to believe that that's the reason. God knew that this would reignite my faith. I believe we're a product of our experiences, both the good and the bad. God places people in our lives. We may learn positive things, or we may think, you know, man, I hope I don't ever act like that. Or, you know, we take a piece of someone away from each person we encounter, and opportunities as well. You know, they shape who we are and who we will become. And this was almost like relaying the foundation for me. However, it certainly was not what I had planned. I'm really grateful to Carolyn for sticking with me and seeing this dream of mine out. And eventually we married. I joined the church shortly before that, a year or so before that, and we married and, you know, began to think about how we're going to build our life together, and does that involve a family or children? And for my wife, it did not. And, you know, we really discussed this a lot with our priest before we were married. Father Dave Johnson is, I consider him a close friend. I knew that Carolyn was the woman I was supposed to marry, and I didn't know how that was going to work out. I knew I wanted children. I knew she didn't. That was tough, but I prayed about it a lot, daily. I tried not to pressure her and not make it all about me, but she knew that I was praying about it daily. And we had some nieces, and, you know, I thought that might change things for her, and for some time it did not. But I do feel pretty strongly that God really changed her heart. We began to think about children. My wife, Carolyn, has a bad back. She's got scoliosis, and it's fairly severe. And so we saw a specialist in St. Louis. This guy is the greatest at what he does in the entire world. You know, people from all over the planet come to St. Louis to see this guy for spinal surgery. And he told us that Carolyn was not to the point that she should have this surgery. It's really a debilitating thing, but that she should also not get pregnant. That, you know, pregnancy, the hormones, softens the bones, and that it would put her in a wheelchair. So we were left not really knowing what to do. I had always been open to the idea of adoption. You know, God really planted that seed for us, and one day we both just decided that this is what we're going to do. We're going to adopt. And we started moving forward, and things just fell in place so quickly. Adoption is a long and arduous process, and I mean, we hammered through application after application and background checks and home studies, and really just burned through all that stuff in record time. And the first day that our paperwork hit the Chinese adoption registry system, we were matched with a little girl. We were told that this never happens. You know, we were expecting to maybe be in the system a year or two. You know, that's pretty common. All we had of this little girl was a picture, but she immediately stole our hearts. There were a few medical questions and that kind of thing to get worked out. Probably the hardest thing I've ever had to do in my life was wait to go get her. We matched with her toward the end of January, and it takes a considerable amount of time for documents to move through the system. There's quite a bit of bureaucracy and red tape and whatever you want to call it. Things just happen slowly. President at the time, Donald Trump, and the Chinese president, things were just not going well. The trade war was beginning, And we were so nervous that the relationship between the U.S. and China would break down, and something was going to happen. And we prayed every day for her safety, for the people that were caring for her, for both governments, that things could just hold on long enough. But finally, in May of 2018, we were able to go to China and pick up our little girl. Anne-Marie has been just the greatest highlight of our lives. When I think back about the process and, even Anne-Marie's birthday, she was born April 1st of 2016, and I don't recall exactly when Carolyn and I made the decision to start this adoption process. But I know that sometime in the spring of 2016, we knew we wanted a child. That's when we went to St. Louis. That's when we found out about, that it wouldn't be a good idea for Carolyn to get pregnant. I don't really believe in coincidences. I truly feel that everything happens for a reason. And I know that God was at work long before we knew he was. God knew this child, our daughter, would need a home. She was born to a mother who loved her, but for reasons we don't know, was unable to care for her. In China, abortion is very common. It's cheap. And this woman carried this child. She gave birth to Anne-Marie in a hospital, even stayed a couple of days under a false name to make sure she was okay. She was born premature. And in China, adoption is illegal. You cannot just place a child for adoption. The state pays for everything, and you're a burden on the state. So people abandon these children. That's the term they use. But there are baby boxes, and things have changed a whole lot in 20 years. It's now a much better process than it used to be. But a lot of children are abandoned at police stations and fire stations. But Anne-Marie's mother brought her to a hospital. She gave birth in the hospital, stayed in the hospital a few days, and really made sure that she was going to be looked after, and really risked exposing her identity. Children who are adopted from China, you get a little bit of paperwork about their previous situation, and one thing the government does is they place a wanted ad. I mean, they search for these babies' families. So it's kind of neat. We have Anne-Marie's little ad where the local government was searching for her family, and she spent right at 2 years in the orphanage. We got her about a month after she turned 2. I just know that God was with this woman, her birth mother, and we are so grateful for her. God steered her to take the actions that she did for a reason, and God gave us this child. That's just how it is. Children are always a blessing. Some of them come difficult. People have difficult births. There's lots of stories out there, but this girl came to us from God. There's no doubt in my mind. Like many young families, the stress of life, marriage, work, parenthood, it weighs heavy on you. And my marriage began to stall out. We didn't have any kind of infidelity. There was no loss of trust, but we spent too much time on work. We spent too much time being parents, building a business, and not nearly enough time on each other. Everybody who's married knows it's extremely hard work. It's one of the toughest things that a person can engage in. A marriage is a vocation, and it's not meant to be easy. But it's important to realize when you're in trouble, and we were. I prayed a lot about it, asked my friends to pray for me and my wife, and finally we got to a point where I contacted our priest. And Father Roby is such a tremendous priest. We are so lucky to have him at St. Mary, and he's just such a blessing. He's so easy to talk to, and I felt so comfortable reaching out to him, and I'm so glad I did. Everyone has gifts. God gives them to all of us. we got to figure out what they are and how to use them. But through our priest, Father Brian Roby, we were introduced to Ethan Bennett. And Ethan is actually Jesse's husband, so she knows all about who I'm talking about here. But Ethan's a Catholic. He's a marriage counselor, and among other things, he's a father and a husband, and is just really well equipped to help couples that are having some trouble. God connected our dots, and Carolyn and I have met with Ethan several dozen times, and it's been such a blessing. He's given us the tools to be better partners, and our relationship has improved so much. When you know somebody a long time, I mean, I've known my wife almost 20 years. We haven't been married quite that long, but when you know somebody that long, you get a little too comfortable, and you forget to acknowledge things and say thank you and appreciate each other. And I think that's something a lot of couples struggle with. They're not unhappy in their marriage, but it's not all it could be. And there's a lot of stigma around marriage counseling, and I'm so thankful that we've got somebody right here in our own parish that is able to approach this from a Christian and a Catholic perspective. We didn't want to get divorced, and I sure didn't want to go see somebody who thought that was going to be one of the options on the table. And I'm so thankful that we met Ethan, and that God really gave us the courage to ask for help and the strength to not be ashamed of needing it. I think it's really important to remember that we're all sinners. We all need the grace of God's forgiveness, and all we have to do is ask for it. You know, I'm a high-strung person. I've acted in anger, and I've said a lot of things I wish I could take back. I've treated others with contempt, and sometimes that's happened in the same day even. I confess that I fail at living a Christian life often. I have faith that God forgives me each and every time I ask Him to, and I really strive to do better. And I think that's all He asks of us. You know, I tell my daughter often, timeouts or whatever's happened, she's in trouble. I try to end it by, you know, let's do better next time. And I think that's all our Father asks of us. We're all going to make mistakes. Faith is really just trust, and I trust in God. I trust that He's all things, and I trust that He's made a home in heaven for me. Although I'm not worthy, He forgives my sins and will welcome me home one day.
Thank you so much, Jesse, for sharing your story with us. It was incredibly moving. And it takes a lot of vulnerability to be able to share something like that so publicly. And so I just want to affirm you for your willingness to come and just to talk to us about these different events that have occurred in your life. If it's okay, I've got a couple questions for you.
Yeah, absolutely.
So I want to go back to, I guess, the beginning. So you talked about the tragedy that occurred early in your life with your mother stepping away from your family and your father, and just the incredible amount of grace that God poured out on you and your family during that time. If you could just talk a little bit more about what was going on in you, what were some of the struggles that you had surrounding this event in your life, the feelings or emotions that were going through you when all of this was occurring?
It's a difficult time for young people. You know, it's a transition out of middle school into high school, and obviously there's a lot of changes happening in your life at that point, and it was tough. You know, I'm sure that's a bit of a protection mechanism. I don't recall exactly how I felt about things. When you're a farmer, there's always lots of work to do, and as the son of a farmer, you're with your dad doing that work, and work can be a very therapeutic thing. We were tobacco growers at the time, and boy, summer is just, there's a lot of work to be done in tobacco patch. And I just remember spending a lot of time thinking to myself quietly and working and trying to process all that was going on. And I didn't understand at the time, you know, why things were the way they were. I just knew my family wasn't whole anymore and didn't know what that meant, you know, for the future. I was so blessed and still am to have such a strong family tie that my grandparents, they're both still living on my dad's side. And until the time I went away to college, I saw my grandparents every day of my life. Our farm was based at their home. I got off the school bus there a lot even. Every day, I was going to end up at the farm and at their house. I think that was really the defining factor in getting through something like that or not. It's having so much family to rely on. My dad was not alone in trying to raise us and figure out how to move forward as a single-parent family. And my grandparents are there, my aunt and uncles also very close by. And we've always been a family that has a lot of dinners and get-togethers. And, yeah, when you have that kind of support, things like this are easier to get through.
Yeah, it sounds like you had an amazing support system.
Yes. My grandparents have very strong beliefs, and not only is my family a very Christian-oriented family, we were very involved in our church and had a lot of church family, and it was Sunday school every Sunday and youth group, and had a lot of positive faith-based reinforcement and reassurance, that things were going to be okay. I had plenty of people there for me if I needed them. Had lots of people to talk to, although I wasn't much of a talker then. Any time I needed to talk about what was happening in my life, whether it be a family member or somebody I was close with at church, I had lots and lots of people that I could reach out to discuss what was happening in my life.
So you weren't just surrounded by your immediate family, but also your church family.
Indeed.
It sounds like embraced you all and was there for you during this time to comfort you, to help guide you, to lift you up.
Very much so, yes.
And so then you mentioned in your 20s, you drifted away a little bit. Was there any particular thing that caused you to drift?
I guess for me it was moved away to a larger city, joined a fraternity, and met many great friends through that experience. But, I was no longer back in the Philpott, Whitesville area in tight with my family, and drifting away from my faith a little bit made me realize that when I was ready to really start living a Christian life again, how much that could impact my daily existence. Yeah. It's hard to have prayers that are answered if you never pray. When you make prayer a part of your life, it really provides the opportunity for self-reflection and to really contemplate where you're at, where you're heading, things that you need to change, and asking God for the strength to make those changes. It really keeps it at the front of your mind. It helps you focus on being a better person and not just going through the motions of life day in and day out.
I think you touched on something important there, that it really is so important for families to help connect their kids to a church when they go off to college, because I know so many young people who it's almost like it's a lot of effort to try to find a place, and they don't know anybody. And so it's hard to make that effort to want to go, to be alone. And I think that should also be very convicting for us as Catholics, that when we do see college students, to be welcoming, to be inviting, because they're there by themselves, especially
Indeed.
In college towns. I mean, out here in Whitesville, it's probably not as big of a thing, but like in Owensboro, these parishes that surround, Brescia, that are over by Wesleyan, in Bowling Green. I know a lot of college kids go to the one on campus, but some of them, might go off campus as well. So, it's important to have a welcoming environment so these young people feel encircled, or they're not going to come back.
That's right.
Or they're not going to search it out in the first place. There were several instances in which you had a plan and God changed that plan completely for your life. And the first one comes in the form of your dad calling you to come back and help with the farming. It sounds like this was kind of a tense time as well. So you could just walk us through a little bit more of that and how you came to understand that this was part of his plan for your life.
Well, as we discussed before, we face multiple decisions on a daily basis. Some of them are very insignificant and some of them are not. But at the end of the day, we have to make a decision. And I felt so strongly that this was right for me. And I really had to just believe that everything else would work out. This was tough. I mean, I was going to go from making a fair amount of money back to really just starting over and making my own way here. And, I was looking forward to getting married soon, and this was going to delay that some. Just financially, it wasn't going to work to get married right away. And Carolyn was still in pharmacy school and went on to pursue a residency, and that further delayed our plans. But sometimes you just really have to believe that the decision is the right decision to make, even though the short term outcomes are not what you want. And we really face these kind of things on the farm a lot. I don't know if any other farmers will be listening to this, but it'll certainly be a familiar thing that we plan a crop out, and we think, okay, well, I'm going to go get this done, and this is how this all going to happen, and this week I'm going to get these many acres sprayed and planted and fertilized, and then it rains, and it wasn't supposed to rain. 0% chance, but it rains like 1.5 inches. Those type things happen often. And being able to, you have to have a plan. You have to make a plan and how you're going to get all this stuff done. But being able to adapt and really just wad that plan up, throw it away, and start over is a part of our daily experience. And that is such a part of life. There are so many parallels with agriculture and farming and just the way life is. And I think that's a difficult thing for some people. We like to make plans. We like to think that we know what's going to happen. But it's quite often that we don't have it all figured out.
Amen to that. I love plans. I love plans, but they always end up going out the window.
Yeah. Yeah, there's no telling how many dollars are made on planners and calendars, and we like to just really pencil our whole life out and think 5 and 10 years ahead, but we don't really know what God has in store for us.
Oh yeah, and in the blink of an eye, everything could change. Look
That's
at
right.
Last year. Overnight, we went from one way of life to a completely different way of thinking, existing, believing. And this whole year has just been something that none of us could have predicted.
No.
And I've crossed
it's been a major
ton of
change.
things off that calendar from last year.
Yeah, me too.
Sounds like there are a lot of great life lessons that can be learned from working in agriculture.
Yeah, I think one of the greatest things about farming is that the job is complex and it changes a lot. And so you may be doing something that is not fun. Maybe it smells bad even. It's hot. It's hard work. But it'll be over soon enough, and we'll be on to the next thing. And, there's not a lot of repetitive things. We have a job to do, and it changes a lot. We go through the seasons, and whether it be working with animals or row crops, really any segment of agriculture, things change with the seasons, and it's very difficult to, if you farm and you enjoy farming, you'll do it forever. It's not for everybody, but it's one of those things that is, this is probably not fair to the pastors of the world, but it often gets compared to that, like farmers and preachers, that you are one or you're not, and it's a lifelong thing. It's not something you can get away from.
So I want to talk a little bit about you coming into the Catholic Church. So you said you grew up Methodist, correct?
I did, yes.
Grew up Methodist. What initially sparked your interest in the Catholic Church?
Well, for whatever reason, I only ever dated Catholic girls and ended up going to Mass a lot. And I just really felt at home at Mass. I like the the formality of it. I like the structure of Mass, and I really enjoy the fact that you could be at a different church and you're going to hear essentially the same message, on any given weekend. I've been to a lot of churches in other countries, and I don't know if they follow the same. I don't always understand what's being said, but you know what's going on. And I've always got a lot out of communion. I never understood why in the Protestant faith that we don't take communion every Sunday. It's such a refreshing thing for me, to really, really feel the power of Christ every Sunday. It's always meant a tremendous amount to me. And I'm sure for some converts, I hear this anyways, that it's a big thing to get over communion being the actual body and blood of Christ. And it was not for me. I had felt that way all along, that this literally was Christ entering our body, and that should be experienced often. That was an important part of me becoming a Catholic. I felt very strongly about the fact that the communion should be taken every weekend, as often as possible. And I wish that I was in a position to come to daily Mass. I wear the pendant of Saint Isidore. It's my baptismal saint. And his story is such a beautiful one. He was a farmhand, actually. And he worked for a man named Juan de Vargas in Spain. And Mr. de Vargas found out that Isidore was not at work as early as he should be, and really chastised him for that. And Isidore told Mr. de Vargas that, he achieved the same amount of work every day as anyone else, and that he was attending daily Mass. And Mr. de Vargas did not believe him, so he checked up on him one day. And sure enough, Isidore was late to work. He had been to Mass, and he began to plow the fields, and Mr. de Vargas noticed an angel plowing beside Isidore. And he was not only getting the same amount of work done as the other man, he was getting more done. And that's such an important lesson, and one I fail at often, but, when you put Christ first, and you put God first, and you put your faith first, there's really nothing that's unachievable.
Honestly, that's the most important thing we can do every day, is put him first, and I'm with you. I fail at that often. So you said that, overcoming the Eucharist as being the body and blood of Christ was not an issue for you. Was there anything that you did struggle with, or that you found difficult as a teaching?
Well, I think there's a real common misconception about Catholicism in that, Catholics don't pray directly to God. I may not have this all right. I don't have dogma memorized and all that kind of stuff. So, you correct me if I've got anything wrong about our faith here. But, I did not understand the purpose and role of saints, the purpose and role of the Pope. And so I had to learn a little bit about that. And now I really enjoy sharing with other folks that we don't worship Mary. Mm-hmm. The saints are mentors, people who have lived an outstanding life, people that we should look up to, mm-hmm. But no more than the way you look up to, your grandfather or someone like that. They are ordinary people who in some extraordinary way have exemplified their faith. Mm-hmm. And, I think that we should really expand the definition of sainthood, because there are everyday saints that we encounter who don't get that type of recognition.
Mm-hmm. Well, so the church does believe that we are all called to be saints. Whenever I talk about this concept with young people, I explain it as a big S or capitalized S saint and a lowercase or little s saint. We are all called to be a little s, so lowercase, saint. We're called to live lives of holiness, to become holy people. But because of the special quality of some people's lives, they become big S or capital case saints. Those are the ones who are officially recognized by the church as saints. We all know people in our lives who we've encountered who are so incredibly holy and spirit-filled, and can be reasonably sure that when they died, they've gone to heaven. The church may never open a case on them and may never declare them as a saint or canonize them, but that doesn't mean that they're not a saint. Actually, if you look up saint in the dictionary, saint is a noun and a verb, so the noun just means that you are a person who's acknowledged as holy or virtuous and typically regarded as being in heaven after death, and the verb is a formally canonized saint. We're all called to live lives of holiness, to be holy people, to be living saints, whether that be officially, so one day you're declared a saint by the church, or if you're just unofficially one of those little s saints.
Yeah. Well, I appreciate the education on that. I didn't
Not
know
a problem,
that.
yeah.
I think you should try to learn something every day, and I've fulfilled my goal for the day here. So
I want to talk a little bit about, move on to talk a little bit about your daughter, if that's okay.
Sure, yeah.
Okay. Adoption is a hard process.
It is.
We know many couples who have chosen to adopt children, and they have shared the ups and downs and the challenges that come with the adoption process, most especially the waiting to be paired with a child and being able to bring that child home. And so your story is unique in that you were very quickly paired. Maybe talk a little bit more about how your wife came to the decision that she wanted kids. I know that that was a struggle for the two of you. And then a little more about the adoption.
Well, I don't want to put words in her mouth. I can only share what she's shared with me and make some assumptions about the process for her. But, as I mentioned, that was something I was praying about daily. And I really feel that God moved and warmed her heart toward the idea of children. And certainly being around our nieces and other children in the family, I'm sure had some impact on that. Children are just such a beautiful thing. I mean, they really bring out the best in people. Just one day, I mean, I was very careful not to pressure her, and, this needed to be her decision. And just one day she was different. She said, I think I want to talk about this. And we began a conversation about what it would look like to have a family, and we knew that there could be some complications for her with her scoliosis, and we weren't really sure, if it was something we should pursue or not. And so we went to the specialist in St. Louis, and as I mentioned, it was a pretty tough deal, and it really set our conversation back a little bit. But by Christmas, we had made a decision. We were going to pursue adoption. And then it was, do we want to do domestic adoption or international? And boy, there are some heart-wrenching things to go through, in the adoption process. When you have the desire for children and you have all this love that you want to give to a child, it's difficult to go through the formalities of the paperwork, and you essentially have to check some boxes and say, I'm willing to take a child with this type of disability, but I'm not willing to take a child with this type of disability. And man, that's tough. Even without knowing those kids, you feel like you're saying no to them. That was pretty hard. But I do believe that it's important to recognize your limitations. And, if you can't provide for a child with special needs, and God bless the people who do. There are couples who, have numerous children with extreme special needs. And, God has really built those people to have the mental strength, the physical strength, the emotional strength to care for a child that is severely disabled. And we certainly would have welcomed a child naturally with any type of physical impairment. And we were so blessed to receive a daughter who is perfectly healthy in every way. She's tiny. She's almost 5 and weighs 32 pounds. And she's going to be a short, tiny woman. She's never going to be a big person. but it doesn't hold her back at all. She's got the personality of a buffalo. She's stout and, got all the confidence in the world. And, of course, as any good parents do, we're trying to rein that in and make sure she grows up to be a good person and not a bully. But she's got a lot of power in that little package, and she's going to be a force to be reckoned with.
That's a double-edged sword as a parent, because on the one hand, I know that they're going to be able to take whatever life throws at them. And on the other hand, I have to parent that child.
Yeah, you don't want to break their spirit, but, it's not okay to scream at the top of your lungs in the middle of the restaurant,
Right, yes, absolutely.
Just because you're not getting your way, so.
In this, in the story of your daughter's adoption, it very much seems like God was playing a hand. Looking back, you have the benefit of seeing all the places in which God intervenes, or where his hand was at work, where you wouldn't have even known it otherwise. And this story is so beautiful because there are so many places in which you can see his fingerprints on the path, even down to the heartbreak of not being able to conceive naturally. That's part of the path that led you to your daughter. So I guess if you wouldn't mind just talking a little bit about the ways in which you've seen God at work in this process, in this journey of coming to and being able to bring home this beautiful little girl.
Yeah, I mean, it really starts with that daily prayer. My wife didn't want to have children, and I did, and I knew I wanted to be with her, and I felt like she was the wife God had chosen for me, and those two things didn't line up. I don't know, maybe I'm an optimist, but I knew things would work out. I felt that they would, and I prayed about it, and I was patient, and they did. And I mean, down to just like dates and timelines, it's incredible to look back at that now and think, wow, about the time that we were deciding we wanted to have children, this little girl's being born. And generally, children in China are not adopted out internationally until they are about 2. There's most of the children who are in an orphanage have some type of ailment. For Anne-Marie, it was that she was born premature and she had a hole in her heart. So she spent about 7 months in the hospital before she ever went to the orphanage. And then the Chinese government is pretty big on, if this child needs an operation, they get it before they are allowed to be adopted. And so Anne-Marie had this hole in her heart, but she was so small, they needed her to get a little bigger before they could perform the operation. And so, she was about 1.5 years old, and they were really making plans for her to have surgery, to have this heart condition repaired. And she went in for her checkup, and the hole in her heart was gone. It had healed naturally. And so she was then available for adoption. And the way things move in China it's just slow. The government, we think our government is bad and that we have all this bureaucracy, but it's really bad there. Right at the time that she was becoming available, our paperwork was entering the system. I don't know the exact day that she became available, but it was not too long before our paperwork hit the system, and we were just instantly matched. We got a call from our adoption agency that we used, and this lady is like screaming into the phone, and she was so excited for us, and she was like, man, this never happens, like 6-7 hours after your paperwork posts, you've been matched with a child. It was just such an incredible and overjoying experience. I have struggled for a long time to talk about this. It's such a emotional thing for me. And this whole podcast thing is totally outside of my comfort zone. I'm an extrovert and I'm a speaker, but I I don't tend to share a whole lot of really deep, intimate, personal things, but I do believe that God asked us to share his message, and it is our job to share with others how our faith has impacted our lives and in some way brighten someone's day or inspire them. And I'm sure there may be some folks who know me well that listen to this and think, man, that's not, that guy. We're all hypocrites, all of us. We know the right thing to do, and yet we don't do it every day, And as we talked about before, we try to do better.
So thank you so much, Jesse, for sharing with us. It's been lovely to get to interview you today.
Well, I really appreciate the opportunity. I think it's a great thing you're doing here with this podcast, and I think you said this is episode 27 or something, so I hope you have many hundreds more.
Me too. And thank you all for listening here today. If you are interested in hearing more stories of finding faith and encountering, tune in next week to hear from our next guest. If you have any questions, need someone to journey with, or would be interested in sharing your story, please contact me at findingfaith123@gmail.com.